A homeless teen had nothing until she saved a stray dog from the cold streets. Years later, that same dog saved her back in a way no one could have ever expected. Lena didn't name him right away. At first, he was just the dog, a wiry, scruffy mutt with matted fur and the saddest eyes she'd ever seen. He had a limp, a torn ear, and a cautious stare, like he'd been betrayed too many times to trust anything anymore. Funny. She knew exactly how that felt. She offered him half of her sandwich, already stale and damp from the rain. He hesitated. Then, with shaking legs, he crept forward and took it gently from her hand. She watched him eat, shivering, crouched beside the trash bin that had become her shelter. He didn't run away after that. Instead, he curled up beside her on the cardboard that barely separated them from the cold concrete. She whispered to him in the dark, "You're not going to leave me, huh?" The next morning, he was still there. From that moment on, they were inseparable. She called him Scruff, because of the way his fur stuck out in every direction like he'd lost a fight with a weed whacker, but he didn't seem to mind. If anything, he wore the name with pride. Days blurred into nights. They slept side by side behind dumpsters, under stairwells, and once inside an abandoned delivery truck. Lena began singing again, not because she wanted money, but because Scruff would wag his tail every time she did. His tail would thump against the ground as if he was applauding. She started busking at the park. Scruff sat beside her with his head tilted, drawing the attention of passers-by. Kids pointed, some people smiled. A few even dropped coins into her guitar case. Not much, but enough for a sandwich or two. One afternoon, an older woman in a red coat stopped to listen. She stood there for almost 20 minutes. When Lena finished the last note of an old lullaby her mother used to hum, the woman approached. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Lena hesitated. She hadn't heard someone speak to her kindly in weeks. "Lena," the woman smiled. "I'm Mrs. Dorsey. You have a gift, don't waste it." Then she bent down and scratched Scruff behind the ears. "And you, sir, are the most polite audience member I've ever met." From then on, Mrs. Dorsey came by once a week. Sometimes she brought Lena warm soup in a thermos. Other times it was clean socks or a second-hand sweater. She never asked questions, never pried. She just smiled, listened, and left with a quiet wave. Scruff adored her, but he never let his guard down completely. Lena noticed he always positioned himself between her and strangers. Once, when a man tried to snatch Lena's backpack, Scruff lunged without hesitation, teeth bared, growling like a wild animal. He chased the man off within seconds. Lena was shaking, but Scruff came back wagging his tail, proud as ever. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his scruffy fur. "You're my hero, you know that?" Every night, she would talk to him like he was human. Tell him about her dreams, her fears, the memories she tried to forget. Scruff never interrupted. He just listened. When winter hit hard, Lena used every spare coin for blankets and dog food instead of eating. She wrapped Scruff up tight and cuddled beside him to keep warm. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, whispering apologies into his fur. "I'm sorry I can't give you more. I'm trying. I really am." But Scruff never left her side. Never once. That loyalty, that quiet love, it was the only thing keeping her going. Winter came in like a punishment. The first snow didn't bring wonder. It brought warning. A thick silence settled over the streets, muffling the sound of passing cars and cracking Lena's already fragile world. Every breath she took became visible in the freezing air. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't just another season. This was survival at its most brutal. Lena had survived a lot. Sleepless nights, hunger that twisted her stomach into knots, and the daily sting of being invisible to the world. But nothing prepared her for the bitter ache of winter with nowhere to go. She and Scruff had taken shelter beneath an old playground slide, using broken cardboard and tattered blankets they'd collected from dumpsters. Lena pressed her body close to his every night, wrapping her arms around his trembling frame. He was thinner now. His once playful bark had grown soft. But even as the cold gnawed at them, he never left her side. She whispered to him in the dark, "I don't care what anyone says, and you're my family, Scruff. You're all I've got." He licked her face in response, resting his head on her chest like a living heartbeat, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Not really. But it was getting harder. Some nights, she barely earned enough to buy a single packet of instant noodles. Most nights, she gave it to Scruff. Watching him eat was enough to quiet the hunger clawing at her belly, at least for a little while. Her fingers had turned red and raw from the cold, and her shoes were falling apart. Every step felt like walking on glass, and still she smiled for him, sang for him, fought for him, until her body finally gave out. It happened on a Monday. She remembered because Mondays were always slow at the park, and she'd been hoping for a few more coins before sunset. She'd played 3 songs with frozen fingers, her voice barely holding tune through chattering teeth. Scruff was curled up beside her as usual, watching every passerby with loyal, tired eyes. When she stood up to pack her guitar, the world spun. Her knees buckled. She dropped hard onto the pavement. Scruff barked, nudging her with his nose, pawing at her chest, whining. Everything blurred into darkness. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was unconscious, but Scruff didn't leave her side. Witnesses later told her that the dog had chased the ambulance, barking and running behind it until he couldn't keep up anymore. He'd followed the flashing lights as far as his legs could carry him, then circled the streets in a panic. It wasn't until a nearby animal control officer spotted him, frantic, cold, alone, that he was taken to a shelter. He didn't resist. Maybe he thought they were taking him to her. They weren't. Lena woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed. Her throat felt like it had been scraped raw. There were tubes in her arms, an oxygen mask strapped to her face. Every muscle in her body ached like she'd been hit by a truck. She blinked through the harsh fluorescent lights, disoriented, confused, and then she remembered. Scruff. Panic surged through her chest. She tried to sit up, but the pain forced her back down. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Where's my dog?" A nurse approached, kind-eyed but cautious. "You need to rest, honey. You were severely dehydrated and had pneumonia. We almost lost you." Lena shook her head. "My dog, he was with me. He must have followed. Please, I need him." The nurse frowned. "You were alone when they brought you in." "I'm sorry." Alone. That word echoed in her mind like a curse. She knew in her soul Scruff would never have abandoned her, which meant something happened. Something terrible. She sat, up again, tears spilling over. Her voice trembled. "Please, someone has to find him. He's all I have." The nurse gently squeezed her hand. "I'll see what I can do." But Lena could see it in her eyes. Polite concern, but no real hope. To them, he was just a stray. Disposable. Replaceable. But he wasn't. He was everything. She spent a week in that hospital room recovering from the pneumonia that nearly ended her life. Social services visited her on the 3rd day. They told her she was a minor, barely 16, and could no longer live on the streets. They said she'd be placed in a temporary group home until a foster placement became available. She didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. Her thoughts were only with Scruff. Where was he? Was he scared? Cold? Hurt? When she was discharged, she begged the caseworker to stop by the local shelters. "Just a few minutes, please. I think he might be there." The woman sighed. "There are dozens of shelters in the city. Dogs come and go every day. You're better off focusing on yourself right now, Lena." Lena looked away, swallowing her tears. She felt the wall go up inside her. The same wall she'd built in foster homes, on cold sidewalks, during nights, filled with hunger. But this time it didn't just protect her, it imprisoned her. The group home was crowded, noisy, and full of kids who had their own battles to fight. Lena didn't talk much. She barely ate. She attended therapy sessions with a quiet, empty stare. Her counselor praised her for showing up, but Lena knew she wasn't really there. Her mind was still in that park, still looking over her shoulder for a flash of scruffy fur, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, Scruff would find her. She tried. Everything. Called every shelter she could find, even convinced a staff member to take her to one on the weekend. But he wasn't there. None of the dogs were him. Each failed visit broke another piece of her heart. Eventually, the visits stopped. The calls went unanswered. The staff grew tired of the same question. She never stopped asking it anyway. Months passed. Spring brought sun and open windows, but not warmth, not really. Not to her. She was moved into a new foster placement, a quiet home with a retired teacher named Miss Evelyn, who loved plants and classical music and didn't ask too many questions. Lena liked that. It gave her space to breathe. Miss Evelyn gave her an old acoustic guitar. It's missing a string, but I figured you'd know what to do with it. Lena didn't know whether to cry or hug her. She just nodded and carried the guitar to her room like it was made of gold. That night she wrote a song. It was simple, raw, no fancy chords or complex lyrics. Just her heart, laid bare in melody. She called it Scruff's Song. She never sang his name out loud, but she didn't have to. Every note whispered it. Every chord carried the weight of what they'd shared. She sang about rainy nights, shared bread, cardboard beds. About a dog who loved a girl with nothing and gave her everything. And in the final verse, her voice cracked on the word sorry. She uploaded it to a tiny YouTube channel with no followers. Just her and the ghost of the life she lost. A week later, the video had 312 views. Then 500. Then 5,000. People commented things like, crying. Who was this song for? You can hear the pain in her voice. This is real. If this is based on a true story, I hope she finds that dog again. She read every comment. Every message. Some made her smile. Others made her weep. But one caught her breath entirely. This sounds like it was written for someone who saved you. Or maybe someone you saved. She stared at the comment for a long time. Then she replied, both. Lena began writing more music. Miss Evelyn encouraged her to submit her work to a youth art program, and to everyone's surprise, including her own, she was accepted. Her songs weren't polished, but they were honest. And people felt that. She started getting gigs, tiny venues, cafes, charity events. Each time she ended with Scruff's song, and each time someone in the audience cried, because you don't have to be homeless to understand. Heartbreak. You don't have to sleep under bridges to know what it feels like to lose something that made you feel whole. Lena was 21 the night she stood on stage in front of her biggest crowd yet. The lights blinded her, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She'd learned to carry the ache, to wear it like a medal. But even with the applause, the recognition, the growing platform, she still felt incomplete. Because the one soul who'd believed in her before anyone else was still missing. After the show, as she stepped outside into the quiet alley behind the venue, she took a deep breath of cold night air. Then she heard it. A bark. Low, scratchy, familiar. Her heart froze. Slowly, she turned, and there, standing. At the end of the alley, his fur gray, his body thinner, older, but his eyes, those eyes. It was Scruff. She didn't move. Couldn't breathe. He stared at her, tilting his head just like he used to. Scruff? She whispered. His ears perked, and then he ran, limping, stumbling, but determined. She dropped to her knees as he crashed into her arms, whining, licking, her face like he was trying to say everything at once. She was sobbing. It's you. Oh my God, it's really you. He smelled like dirt and rain and something ancient, but she didn't care. He'd found her. After all this time, after all the loss, the pain, the distance, he'd come back. She didn't know how. She didn't need to. He was home. They say some moments are too perfect for this world, like time. Bends just for a second, making everything align. That was the night Lena held Scruff in her arms again, after 5 years of aching silence and unanswered prayers. It felt like waking up from a long, bitter dream. And yet, it was real. He was, Real. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into his scruffy, weathered fur. His body was thinner, his limp more pronounced, but his eyes, those eyes still held the same fierce loyalty, the same wordless devotion. "I looked for you everywhere," she whispered, holding him tighter, her voice cracking under the weight of lost time. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Scruff nuzzled into her shoulder, letting out a soft whimper. And in that moment, all the years they'd spent apart seemed to melt away. There were no words for this kind of love, no language that could capture the depth of a bond forged through survival. He remembered her. She had feared, every single day, that he wouldn't, that too much time had passed, that he might have moved on, forgotten her scent, her voice, her face. But no. Even after all this time, he had found his way back, and the world felt right again. The next morning, Lena woke up with Scruff curled beside her for the first time in years. She, half worried she'd imagined it. But there he was, curled up at the foot of her bed in Miss Evelyn's guest room, breathing softly, his tail thumping against the comforter the moment she opened her eyes. She laughed through her tears. "You're really here?" He just tilted, his head, the way he always did when he didn't understand the words but felt the love behind them. Miss Evelyn stood at the doorway, mug in hand, eyes wide. "So, this is the Scruff?" Lena nodded, unable to speak. Miss Evelyn smiled. "Well, looks like he found his way home after all." The vet visit revealed the truth Lena had quietly feared. Scruff was old now, maybe 10, maybe older. He had arthritis in his back legs and some hearing loss in his left ear. But otherwise, he was healthy, still strong enough to go on walks, chase pigeons, and curl up beside her every night like no time had passed at all. Lena didn't waste a single moment. Where she went, Scruff followed. Recording sessions, park gigs, even interviews. If she could bring him, she did. People started asking about the dog behind the song, and when she told the story, the real story, something shifted. Audiences cried. Hosts paused mid-interview, visibly moved. Comment sections flooded with words like, "This is the most beautiful story I've ever heard." Not just a song, a life story. You and Scruff were always meant to find each other again. And soon, doors opened. One day, Lena received an email with a subject line that made her heart stop. "TEDx invitation, we'd love to share your story." She read it 3 times before believing it. A real TEDx event. A chance to stand on stage. Not just as a singer, but as a survivor. As a girl who had once slept beneath slides and begged strangers for change, who now had a voice that reached thousands. And of course, she brought Scruff. As she stepped onto the red circle under soft stage lights, she took a deep breath. "I want to tell you a story," she began. "Not just about music or struggle or rising up, but about a dog. A scruffy stray dog who found a broken girl in an alley one night and gave her something no human ever had." The room fell silent. She didn't speak like a performer. She spoke like a soul unwrapping its deepest scars. She told them everything. The frostbitten nights, the near-death collapse, the endless search, the way Scruff had always watched her, protected her, loved her even when she had nothing to offer. And then, the moment she stopped speaking, she whistled. From the side of the stage, Scruff trotted out slowly, his little limp still visible, but his tail wagging like it could power the whole world. The entire audience erupted in tears and applause. After that, things changed. Music labels offered contracts. Streaming platforms reached out. Her followers tripled overnight. But Lena stayed grounded. She didn't chase fame, she chased meaning. And everything she did, every show, every interview, every song, was somehow woven back to Scruff. She started a foundation in his name, the Scruff Project. Its mission? To provide resources for homeless teens with pets, so no one would ever have to choose between shelter and the creature that loved them unconditionally, because she had lived that choice, and she knew the heartbreak it left behind. One afternoon, months after the TEDx talk, Lena was standing at the edge of a rooftop garden in downtown LA. Scruff was asleep beside a patch of wildflowers, his head resting on her shoe. She was watching the sunset when her phone buzzed. It was a message from a man named Jacob Reyes, an investigative journalist who had seen her talk. "I think I found the shelter Scruff was taken to. There's more to the story than you know. Can we talk?" Her heart skipped. They met at a small cafe where Jacob slid a folder across the table. Inside were records, notes, a name she hadn't heard in years: Weston Kennels, a private, underfunded facility that had a contract with the city, the kind that didn't keep strays long, the kind that barely scanned for chips, barely checked missing reports, the kind that tossed away animals like garbage. Scruff had been there for 4 days, and then adopted out. "I don't know how he ended up back on the street," Jacob said, tapping the papers. "But someone signed for him. Someone who probably didn't care about the kind of bond he had with you." Lena felt sick. To think he'd been so close, just a few miles away, and she'd never known. But then, gratitude swept in like a warm tide. Because despite all of that, despite being dumped, lost, and aged, Scruff had found his way back. Not just to her city, to her soul. She cried herself to sleep that night, not from sadness, but from a bittersweet kind of joy, the kind that hurts a little because it's too full. Scruff was curled beside her, snoring softly, and for the first time in a long time she felt whole. Years passed. Scruff's pace slowed, his naps grew longer, his eyes a little cloudier, but he was still Scruff, still wagging, still listening, still looking at her like she was his whole world. And she was. When he passed away, Lena didn't post about it for days, not because she was hiding, but because it was too sacred to share with the world immediately. When she finally did, she uploaded a video called "The Dog Who Found Me Twice." It was simple. Just a montage of old clips, him running through a sprinkler, curling beside her on studio floors, licking her face backstage, walking slowly beside her at the beach. And at the end, her voice: "Scruff wasn't just my dog. He was my lifeline. He saw me when I was invisible, chose me when I had nothing, waited for me when the world moved on. And somehow he came back, just to remind me that love never forgets, not even when the world tries to bury it." Millions watched. Thousands messaged. And once again, Lena helped the world feel something real. A year later, she stood in front of a crowd at Tuau. The night Lena found Scruff again wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in pain or loneliness, but in love, healing, and the quiet miracle of a bond that had refused to break. When she woke next morning, sunlight streaming through Miss Evelyn's cozy guest room, Lena reached toward the foot of her bed, and there he was, Scruff. His fur was rougher than she remembered, his breathing slower. But when he opened his eyes and looked at her, she knew he had never stopped loving her. She smiled, tears already welling. "You're really here?" Scruff wagged his tail in reply, curling his old body against her side like he had 5 years ago, when they shared a cold alley beneath a broken slide. But this time there was no trash can fire to warm them, no hunger gnawing at their bellies, no fear of being alone. This time, there was a bed, and sunlight, and warmth. This time, they were safe. Word of Scruff's return spread fast. Lena's fans, who had heard only fragments of the truth, flooded her socials with comments. "Is that really him? The universe gave you a miracle. You found each other again. I'm crying." But it wasn't just fans who noticed. The story caught the attention of the Daily Light, a feel-good media outlet known for viral human interest pieces. A reporter named Caleb reached out asking for an interview. Lena was hesitant at first. This wasn't just content, it was her heart, her history. But when Caleb arrived, with kind eyes, notepad in hand, and a gentle presence that reminded her of kindness she hadn't always known, she agreed. He asked questions few had dared. "Were you ever afraid he'd forgotten you?" "Yes," Lena admitted softly. scratching behind Scruff's ear. But I was more afraid I'd forgotten him. The way he sounded, the way he smelled when he curled beside me, the rhythm of his breathing. I clung to every piece I could remember. The story exploded online, and not just because of the dog. People saw themselves in Lena's resilience, in her hope, in the aching love between two souls who had nothing and still chose each other. As months passed, Lena's music soared, not because she had the best voice, but because it was honest. When she sang, people cried, because they knew every lyric came from a place that had seen darkness and still chosen light. Scruff became part of her act. She'd bring him on stage during the final chorus, and crowds would erupt into applause. He'd wag his tail tucked shyly, ears flopping as Lena knelt beside him. One night, during a benefit concert, something happened that changed everything. Lena was mid-song when a little girl ran down the aisle. Security froze, but before they could react, Scruff jumped off his pillow and trotted toward her. The girl stopped in her tracks. She was no older than 7. Her clothes were worn, her cheeks pale, but her eyes glowed with a wild sort of wonder. Scruff nudged her hand gently, and the girl dropped to her knees, hugging him like a long-lost friend. Lena stopped singing. The theater was silent, watching, and, in that silence, the girl whispered, "He looks like the dog I used to have, before the shelter made us leave him behind." Lena felt her throat tighten. Her chest burned. After the show, she found the girl and her mother. They were staying in a women's shelter nearby, trying to rebuild after escaping an abusive home. Lena didn't just take a photo, she took action. She donated proceeds from that night to the shelter. Then she started something new, the Scruff Project. Its mission: help homeless youth and families keep their pets even through crisis, because no one should ever have to choose between survival and their best friend. Within months, the foundation grew. It partnered with local shelters, built mobile vet clinics, created safe spaces for youth with pets to sleep together, instead of being torn apart by systems that didn't understand. And Lena? She wasn't just an artist anymore. She was a force. But through it all, she never changed. She still slept with Scruff at her side, still scratched his ears every morning, still sang to him when no one else was listening. One night, she whispered, "You saved me. Now it's my turn." Years passed, but their bond never faded. Scruff aged. He moved slower, slept longer. But every time Lena sat at the piano, he'd hobble over, curl beneath her feet, and listen. She started writing an album just for him. Each song was a memory. Of the alley, the park, the night he disappeared, the night he returned. The final track was called "Home Always Finds Us." It was raw, heartbreaking, beautiful. On the album release day, Lena hosted a candlelight concert in a garden lit with fairy lights. Fans came from across the country, some who had once been homeless themselves, others who had lost pets. All of them drawn by her story. Midway through the concert, she paused. "This next song is for the one who taught me that love doesn't have a leash," she said, voice trembling. "It waits. It finds a way back." Then she turned to her side. Scruff wasn't there. For the first time in months. He was too tired to come. She played anyway, and as the final notes faded into the night, tears streaming down her face, the crowd stood in silence, honoring a love that had become legend. Weeks later, Scruff passed away quietly in his sleep, curled beside Lena as he had always been. She held him for hours, heartbreaking but full, because not many get to say goodbye like that. Not many get to be found twice. After he was gone, Lena planted a tree in the garden, an oak, tall and strong. Beneath it, she placed a plaque. "Scruff, the one who found me when I was lost, the one who waited, the one who loved me back to life." But his story wasn't over. Lena turned his memory into a movement. She launched Scruff's Sanctuary, a nationwide initiative to pair therapy dogs with at-risk youth. Kids who had lost everything just like she once had. And when those kids met their dogs, something changed, walls came down, smiles returned, trust began, and everywhere she went, Lena shared their story. How a scrappy stray and a broken girl survived the streets. How love brought them back together, and how that love now rippled out, saving others in ways no one could have expected. One day, years later, Lena sat under Scruff's tree with a new dog, a rescue with floppy ears and wide eyes. She didn't name him Scruff. That name was sacred, but she whispered to the new pup, "I think he sent you." The dog licked her cheek and she smiled, because even though one chapter had ended, the story continued, and through it all, one truth remained. Real love never leaves. It remembers. It returns. And sometimes it saves us twice. Years later, Lena stood at the gates of a school she had never seen before, but one that bore her name, the Lena Rivers Academy for Youth and Animal Healing. It had taken years, but her dream, born under streetlights and cardboard roofs, had finally found soil to grow. Inside the school were classrooms, music rooms, therapy spaces, and a small animal sanctuary where kids could bond with rescue animals. Every inch of the place whispered one message: you matter. You're not broken. You are loved. A girl named Harper approached, no older than Lena had been when she first met Scruff. Harper had survived a storm of her own: abuse, foster care, homelessness. But now she was stable, supported, and smiling as she cradled a small, trembling puppy in her arms. "He's scared," Harper whispered. "So were we," Lena replied gently, crouching beside her. "But fear's just the first step toward healing." Harper looked up, her eyes wide. "Did your dog ever stop being scared?" Lena smiled, eyes misty. "No, but he learned to trust, because someone trusted him first." Harper nodded like she understood something deep, something only those who've been broken can truly feel. Later that day, after touring the school, Lena returned to the oak tree, the one she'd planted years ago for Scruff. Its branches had grown wide, casting long, dappled shadows over the garden. There was a bench beneath it now, engraved with words in flowing script. For every lost soul who found love in the darkness, Lena sat, her guitar resting on her knee. The new rescue pup, still unnamed, curled beside her. He looked nothing like Scruff, but something in his gaze was achingly familiar. As the wind stirred the leaves above them, Lena began to sing softly, an unfinished song she'd never dared perform before. It told the story of a girl who had nothing, a dog who had less, and a miracle that brought them together. Not once, but twice. That night, Lena received a letter, not an email, a real handwritten letter, on crumpled paper with the faint scent of tobacco and rain. She unfolded it carefully, the edges fraying like an old memory. "Dear Lena, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Joe. I was the shelter janitor who saw you sneak in all those years ago. I saw how you clung to that dog like he was your whole world. I wanted to tell you something, but I never had the courage back then. The night the shelter took Scruff away, I fought to keep him for you. I begged the manager to let me hold on to him. When he said no, I took a risk. I made a deal. I drove Scruff to a farm outside the city, gave him to an old friend who ran a rescue. He wasn't chipped, so no one knew. But I couldn't bear to see him put down. Something told me he had someone still waiting. Years later, I saw your face in the paper, hugging that same dog. And I knew I'd done the right thing. I'm old now, don't have much time left, but I wanted you to know. You didn't find him by accident. He found his way back, because you never gave up. That kind of love doesn't get lost. It just waits." With respect, Jolena pressed the letter to her heart. All this time she'd thought fate had brought Scruff back to her. But now she knew. It had been a person. A man who saw what no one else did. Who made a quiet choice that changed everything. And in that moment, something clicked deep inside her. Her story wasn't just about being saved, it was about the ripple effect of one good deed. A hungry girl feeds a stray. A janitor hides a dog. A lost pup finds his way back. And somehow, a life becomes a light for millions. Lena looked at the sky, stars scattered like stories waiting to be told. Then she turned to the pup beside her. "You're not a replacement," she said gently. "You're a continuation." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Scruff's old collar, faded leather, the tag still faintly etched. She held it up. The puppy tilted his head, tail, wagging once, and in that second, she knew his name. Ripple. Because that's what Scruff had been, and what she hoped to be. A single act of kindness that rippled through time, saving a girl, building a legacy, changing the world. And now, dear listener, maybe you've never saved a stray. Maybe you've never slept on the street or watched someone you love disappear. But maybe, just maybe, there's a ripple waiting inside you too. What if one small act of love could rewrite someone's whole story? Would you do it? Because as Lena's life proves, you never know what a single moment of compassion might become. If that story stirred something in your heart, wait until you hear what happened when a mute girl stepped into a courtroom. Only to speak her first word in front of a judge who knew her secret. Don't miss it. Subscribe now, and let the next story find you.